winter webinar. We are just getting started actually. We are going to go over a few helpful tips for riding in the winter. I'm going to first start off by talking about the different alternatives. So although you may want to go out and ride, you can go multimodal. You can ride, and if it gets cold, just know that there are other options to getting around. So you can bike and use Metro as another option with biking. So if you're riding and then it's getting a little bit too cold for you, if you are in the DMV region, there are Metro stations and bus stations generally nearby. I know Google is a great um, platform to search your nearby metro stations. But going multimodal is another way of getting out there and biking in the winter. So you can do a bit of your biking, and then if you get tired or if it's too cold, just know that it is okay to put your bikes on the train or on the bus to continue on your way. Another way of riding in the winter, if you are commuting into work, there are other options than just riding all the way in, especially if it's super cold. You can drive halfway to work, park, and then ride your bike the rest of the way. This is helpful. So, again, you aren't having to ride the entire way. And also, it's just a easier way to get into work sometimes rather than making that full ride all the way there. So just know that you can drive halfway and bike the rest of the way as well. So going multimodal is the topic that we are discussing at the time. Another alternative is picking certain days to commute. So you don't have to ride your bike every day. You can pick certain days to ride. So you can ride on Mondays or Wednesdays or whatever days are convenient for you. I would definitely check the weather before you're going out. Going out, there may be some days that are colder than others. So just keep that in mind before you head out on your ride. So again, picking certain days, you don't have to ride 5 days or 7 days out of the week. You can pick certain days to go out and ride, um, which could be helpful for yourself getting around. So again, checking the weather conditions before you're going out will be very helpful. So you're kind of avoiding if there is going to be snow in the forecast or any extreme cold weather conditions. So that is going to be the alternatives to riding in the winter. Again, we just talked about going alternatives to riding in the winter or riding in the cold weather. You can go multimodal, so this means jumping on the train or the bus if it gets too cold. You can also drive halfway and then ride the rest of the way. You can also just pick certain days to commute. So this just means picking a few days out of the week to commute to work rather than every day. So whether it's not even commuting to work, whether it's just going on a ride, you don't have to ride every day. So just picking certain days to ride or kind of gauging that based off the weather and what days may be helpful. So the next topic that we are going to discuss before I move on, I'll just give some time at the end of each topic. If you have any questions, feel free to put your questions here in the chat. Uh, you can type there, ask your questions, or add any comments that you have as I am discussing throughout this presentation, and I'd be happy to answer them on screen. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about gear and clothing. This can be helpful, of course, keeping you warm, keeping you safe, um, and there's some other helpful tips. So starting off, we're going to talk about gloves and protection for your hands. When you're riding in the cold, generally, when you're riding, especially in cold weather, your hands are going to get very cold, especially when you're riding in wind or any other extreme conditions. So gloves are super helpful. There are a number of different um, winter gloves that are wind resistant, so that can kind of protect your hands for a while. Another option for hand protection are bar mitts. So bar mitts pretty much attached to your bar, and you kind of slip your hands in them rather than having some actual gloves on your hands. So you can either use a combination of both as well if you find that helpful. But gloves and bar mitts are definitely super helpful for keeping your hands warm. Those are one of the first few things to go cold when you're riding in the winter or in the colder months. So gloves, bar mitts. I can even add that adding hand warmers into your gloves are helpful, and I have used them over the past few winters. If you do use those, I would recommend just grabbing a few packs if you have them to replace because they do not last forever. So if you are commuting somewhere, just grab some for the ride there and the ride back. So gloves and bar mitts are a very good option for keeping your hands warm. Next thing I'm going to talk about is layers. Again, when you're riding in the cold weather, it will be very cold, being that you'll be riding. Um, you'll be riding towards the wind, and the wind will kind of just be making things feel a bit colder. So adding some layers. So whether you have a lighter jacket, but a long sleeve shirt or thermals underneath, that is very helpful. I would just keep in mind that when you do ride, you may tend to get hot. So just keep in mind that you don't want to over layer. So that doesn't mean throwing on the biggest coat that you have and 2 layers underneath, because as you ride, you will get warm. Your body heats up as you are riding. So I would definitely recommend adding like wind resistant jackets, which are helpful for kind of protecting you from the wind that is coming, but also adding layers underneath, which is also helpful. So this applies to the top and bottom layer as well. So, and then the last thing is socks. I have found this very helpful myself with putting on thick socks when riding, especially because I don't tend to ride in like winter boots. I just find some comfortable sneakers that I can wear some thick socks with. Staff at WABA has suggested wool socks, which I have definitely found super helpful with keeping my feet warm. So again, I will keep that in mind when riding, and just using some thick socks or wool socks when riding to keep your feet warm. Because again, I know for personal experience, my hands and feet are the first things to go cold. So those are the main things that I want to cover when I'm riding in the cold weather. So just to do a quick recap, gloves and bar mitts are helpful, but again, not needed if you plan on going on short rides. But again, when you're riding towards the wind, it will be a bit colder than just standing in it. So gloves, bar mitts, and hand warmers if you want to add those inside of your gloves. We also talked about layers. So adding layers, but not putting on too many. So having a few layers, maybe a wind resistant jacket with a layer or 2 underneath can be helpful. Just keep in mind that over layering will make you very hot, and instead of taking clothing off as you're riding, you kind of just want to add on a few layers so you can maintain a steady body heat. So yes, thank you. Ursula is adding some comments in the chat. So yes, and that's it. It's really cold. Yeah, some shorter rides can also still be very cold. And then the last thing I talked about was socks. So again, I said that gloves, my hands and my feet are the first things to go cold. So thick socks, wool socks are recommended for keeping your feet warm. So again, keeping that in mind when riding, especially if you don't have like winter riding shoes. Yeah, some thick socks can be very, very helpful. So again, if you have any questions on gear and clothing so far, I'm happy to answer that. You can leave your questions there in the chat. I will be happy to answer those on screen. So moving on, we are going to talk about Things to look out for the road. Look out for on the road. When you're riding in the cold weather, you are going to want to look out for some things that are on the road that, of course, that you may not come across in the warmer months. Um, so some of these you may be able to come across, but in the cold weather and rain, some of these conditions um, may be worse. So, so things to look out for on the road. Wet leaves. So in the colder months, the wet leaves can be very slippery, even in the warmer months as well. Honestly, wet leaves, these can be very slippery when riding over them. So if you do have to ride over them, I would not ride very fast over them. I would also just keep an eye out to make sure that there's not like a layer of ice uh, over over the leaves as well. So wet leaves are a thing to look out for. They can be very slippery when you're riding over them, and could potentially uh, cause you to slip out from your bike or the bike to slide when you're riding over them. So wet leaves, if you can avoid them, avoid them. But if you do have to ride over them, I would recommend going slow at a steady pace or walking over them as well. So, and which I would talk about walking your bike towards the end. So wet leaves are a thing to look out for. Another thing to look out for, which uh, may not be easy to see, but that is black ice. Black ice is not easily visible, but you can sometimes see like a coat of ice over the pavement where, again, you'll want to avoid, especially turning your wheel on black ice could potentially cause an accident or a fall. So again, keeping an eye out for black ice on the road. That's why when I'm riding, I tend to look up, but every few feet or so, I'm looking down at the ground just to make sure that there's nothing ahead that I should be looking out for. Um, so keep an eye out for black ice. Also, steel plates. Again, at the beginning of this discussion, I said that we'll be talking about just riding in the colder weather, cold weather, staying away from riding in like snow or anything. But if you do happen to be riding in snow or cold weather, you'll want to look out for steel plates, especially in snow. You may not be able to see them, but you may see like a rise in the snow. So that is a good indication that there is like a steel plate or a raised ledge that you should keep an eye out for. Um, so steel plates also in the colder weather may freeze over, especially if it's recently rained. You'll want to keep an eye out for those steel plates because just like wet leaves, they can be very slippery when riding over. And I would definitely recommend not turning your wheel while on them, or if you do, just doing that at a slow and steady pace. Thank you, Ursula. She's commenting on replying to some of uh, the comments that are going here in the chat. Uh, Again, we just talked about things to look out for on the
road. Molly, I'm looking up some clothing stuff right now. Trey, do you want to take layering stuff, or do you want me to enthuse about wool and layering?
Yes. So the staff person that actually told me about wool was Ursula. So I'll actually let you take on that if you
mind. So thinking about layering in the cold, really it's kind of like I'll just go say 3-layer cake as a weird analogy, I don't know. So the first layer you want is wicking. So it's something, like a lot of athletic stuff specifically is designed for this, to like take moisture from your body and like bring it out. And a great, so cotton for that is bad because cotton, when it gets wet, gets cold and like doesn't retain your body heat. Wool as a wicking layer actually is great because it wicks. It when it gets cold, it still stays warm, which is also why I'm such a fan of like wool socks. And I know Sandra has another person in that room that is very enthusiastic about wool socks, a coworker of ours. And wool is also antimicrobial and like anti-stink. So it's gonna like keep actually smelling decent for a long time. Just don't probably wash it in hot water if you want it to remain the same size. And then your second layer is all of that like warm snuggliness. So for me, actually just at home today, you know, I have a wool shirt. This is why I keep referencing it. I also have a wool sweater that's all my warmth. But you can also do lots of other things. For me, I find the other thing is that my core tends to get cold. So I'm definitely in team vest as one of my layers. And I will often in the winter tuck a undershirt or something between where like my pants meet my shirt, because that like, especially in my back, the like getting a little bit of wind right on your bare skin or something is just, and then the outside layer, ideally, especially if it's real cold, is something that's at least a little bit like wind blocking. So not necessarily a windbreaker raincoat type thing, if you want a little bit of ventilation, but some other sort of jacket. Trey is wearing, we both have, they're Patagonia, they're rain resistant jackets that are great for just like blocking a lot of that wind, because that going in, especially the downside of wool, is it has a bunch of like, you know, holes in it from the knitting that can get to your core. So I'm all about tons of layers. Silk is also a great natural layer because it's really thin, and it can, if it's just tucked up, especially like silk scarves, which are easy to find secondhand, at least back when we could go into stores as a concept, are great as like a neck thing because they're thin and they really can like retain a fair amount of heat. And it helps to like kind of fill that like neck gap. I'm all about every single place where there might be a gap in air. I want to cover with a thing. And I'm also a huge fan of like tights in the winter, or full-on long underwear as a way to also bridge that gap between socks and pants and shirts, adding a little bit underneath. And I know, oh yes, advice on layering over or under cycling pants. So if you've got a full padded chamois, that should be the first layer between your body and it. So that should be underneath. That is, cycling pants like that are a don't wear underwear sort of situation, because that could be rubbing and irritate you. For me, I like to do the chamois and then I'll do some sort of like running tights as kind of adding that base layer. And then probably I tend to own a fair amount of long underwear and other things that are designed to retain heat. But I also have, like, for me in the winter for transportation biking, I've got pants that are in a slight range. So I've got some thicker pants that I can wear with that long underwear and tights underneath it, and that feels comfortable. And for me, having a small range works because right now, at least in my life, my body doesn't change a lot. But you know, everyone is unique in what all of our bodies like to do, and knows more about stuff. Yes. Same for kids. The bar mitts, I know some kids have had issues with getting out and in with the hands quickly. So that might be a like safety concern of like getting breaks and jazz. Thinking especially for windbreaking, if the kids are in a cargo bike, because they're not like creating that body heat themselves. Let's see, anything else for kids? I'm trying to think if there's anything about kind of general like body proportions of children, because it's different, that would impact layering. Probably not as much of the silk stuff, maybe, depending on, I know I can get a little more of the like pricier stuff because I'm responsible for paying the bills on it, and a little less likely to lose it personally than I would have been when I was younger. That was a lot of me blathering. Trey, anything to add on kids and layering and or cycling pants?
Yeah, I think you actually touched on a lot of the topics that I was thinking of. But I'll keep that in mind. And if I add anything, will be at the end if anything does come up. So. Cool. So again, please, thank you all. Thank you, Ursula, for chiming in on that as well. Feel free to continue to add questions here in the chat. Also, if you all have any helpful suggestions or tips for any of these questions or topics, please feel free to share them here in the chat as well. Just doing a quick recap, we have talked about alternatives and other ways to continue biking in the cold weather. We have talked about gear and clothing. We have talked about things to look out for on the road. So again, wet leaves, black ice, and also steel plates. And now we're moving on, and we're going to talk about some accessories that may be helpful, that may be helpful for riding in the cold weather, as well as at night and in day. So I'm going to talk about lights. Lights are super helpful, especially if you plan on biking anytime in the evening. It is getting darker very early now, so around 5 o'clock. If you plan on biking around that time frame, you should plan to have some lights on your bike. This helps you see what's ahead. If you have bright enough lights where you can front lights, so we recommend that you have a white front and a red rear. The white front is again going to be helpful for you seeing what's ahead of you, and for other people riding to also see you coming. So, and the red rear is helpful for the people behind you to also see you as well. So again, lights are helpful in the daylight and at night. I didn't know this was a thing before, but having your lights on and maybe like a strobing or a blinking effect during the day is also helpful for allowing other people to see you, because that steady strobing effect brings the attention to your bike or the person riding. So again, having your lights on in the daylight is also helpful. If you do have lights that have to be recharged, I would recommend like bringing the charger with you, or just making sure before you head out that day that they are fully charged, so you aren't riding out with a dead battery. Um, so again, lights are super helpful, especially for some of the things that we mentioned above or before in the things to look out for on the road. Your lights can be helpful for allowing you to see the wet leaves or the black ice or maybe the steel plates that we just talked about. Another thing that I like to talk about are fenders. Um, Fenders are definitely helpful for when you're riding in rainy conditions, especially snow or even ice. This keeps the elements from kind of coming back up onto the rider. Um, I know some bikes have the capabilities of adding fenders onto some of the fixtures that are already made onto the bike, but others, there are alternatives. They have fenders that you can add to your seat posts, fenders that can be zip tied onto the frame, or a few other options. So fenders will definitely be helpful if you plan on riding in any rain, or if you do plan on riding in the snow. It kind of will keep the elements from coming back onto the rider when you're riding. I could say from personal experience that with having fenders, if you are riding like in the snow, it will kind of want to clump up where the fender is and the wheel meets. So just keep that in mind. If you feel like it's slowing down, if your bike is slowing down, it's probably because the snow or any other elements are kind of just built up inside of the fender. Um, so yes, fenders can be very helpful for just keeping uh, you pretty much dry. I know, again, if you're riding in the rain, that won't avoid the rain from hitting you, but it will keep the water that's on the ground from coming back up from the wheel. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. So those are just a few accessories. Again, if you have any personal accessories that you found helpful for riding in the colder months or even in the snow, please feel free to share those, just giving a quick name of what it is, or maybe even where people might be able to find it. So moving on to the last few topics, a few post-ride tips. The number one thing that I have found helpful is cleaning off your bike after after a ride, especially salt or dirt. It can build up on your bike, especially the chain, and can affect performance. So I would recommend cleaning the chain off. If you do have the capacity to wipe your bike down as well, that may be helpful. But I think the main thing is cleaning and re-lubing your chain can be very helpful, because riding in the colder months or in the snow, it will kind of gunk up on the chain and strip all of the lube off. So you'll want to just give it a quick wipe down with the rag, or if you have some like older toothbrush to kind of get inside of every little groove. But I think wiping it down with the rag is definitely helpful, and then re-lubing that. So the next time that you go out, your chain is moving smoothly. It isn't getting caught up, and it kind of all the moving parts on your drivetrain can move smoothly with that. So that is probably the major post-ride tip that I have, is just cleaning your bike off, mainly the chain, if after riding in like extreme conditions as well. Doesn't even have to be extreme. If you're riding in the rain or snow, I recommend cleaning your chain off afterwards. And then the last topic, this was something that was shared by Ursula as well, is walking your bike. So if you're riding in the cold weather and you do happen to come across a patch of ice or something that you may need to cross and you don't feel comfortable riding, I would recommend walking your bike. But when you're walking your bike, I've been told that it is helpful to do a form of walking that's not, I wouldn't say normal, but you're doing a penguin waddle. So as penguins kind of waddle from side to side, you're taking short steps to kind of prevent you from falling over. So keeping your posture upright, but wobbling and taking short steps in order to keep your balance, and also holding on to your bike while doing that will create another form of balance. But again, that wobble when you're waddle when you're walking is helpful for kind of just keeping your balance when walking over ice. So again, this may be helpful for walking over wet leaves as well, depending on if it's cold enough where the water may freeze over the leaves as well. So that is a quick tip for walking your bike. But again, walking your bike at any time when you don't feel comfortable riding should be your call, and it's something that you should definitely do if you don't feel comfortable riding over certain places. So that is kind of wrapping up what we all wanted to talk about today. But again, we're going to leave some time to chat, answer questions or ask questions if you have any. But just to do a quick recap, if anybody joined late or just want to go over again what we talked about a few alternatives to riding. So this was going multimodal, so this means riding. And then if you get tired or just want to stop riding, it is okay to just hop on the train or hop on the bus with your bike. You can also drive halfway to work and then park and then ride the rest of the way is also a good alternative. And then lastly, just pick certain days to ride. So whether you're commuting or whether you just want to get out and ride, kind of keep an eye out on the weather conditions and choose certain days to ride. You don't have to ride every day. You can just pick a few days out of the week to ride or just on the weekend. That may be helpful as well. So we also talked about gear and clothing. We talked about gloves and bar mitts. So again, this is keeping your hands warm when you're riding. This can be very helpful because between your hands and your feet, those are going to be the first few things to freeze or get cold, and you do want to have full movement of your hands and using your brakes and can actually feel them. So having gloves or bar mitts can definitely be helpful, as well as layers. Ursula went into detail about layers and having it like a 3-layer cake. I like that analogy as well. So yes, using layers. And then again, going back to like your feet, making sure that your feet stay warm by wearing thick socks or wool socks could definitely be helpful. Next, we talked about things to look out for on the road. So this is looking out for wet leaves because they can be slippery when riding over them. I recommend that you should not turn your wheel, especially not very quickly as well when riding over slippery objects. So that's leaves or black ice as well, and also steel plates. So those are a few things to look out for when riding. That's wet leaves, black ice, as well as steel plates. Then we went to talk about lights and how they are helpful, allowing you to see in the at night. Of course, it is getting darker much earlier, so having lights on your bike is super helpful for when riding at night. This allows you to see what's ahead of you and allows others to see you as well. And we also talked about fenders. So fenders are going to be helpful if you plan on riding in the rain or in the snow. Is going to keep things from shooting up from your wheel onto the rider. So fenders can be attached to the bike itself, or they have attachments that can be zip tied on or attached to the seat post. And the last few things that we talked about was some post-ride tips. The main thing is cleaning and re-looping your chain. This is going to be super helpful, especially if you've just ridden in rain or any snow. You're going to want to clean your chain and re-lube that. And if you also have time, I would recommend wiping down the bike because the salt and dirt can also affect your paint as well, but mainly affect the performance of the bike. And then the last thing we talked about was just walking your bike. So if you have to walk your bike over any slippery things on the ground, you want to do what is called like the penguin waddle. So it's taking short steps and waddling side to side to kind of keep your balance And also, while holding on your bike will also create another support system for you when walking over slippery objects. So that is actually going to wrap up how to ride in the winter. Again, we wanted to leave some time for you to either share some helpful tips that you've learned from riding in the winter, or just ask any questions if you have them as well. So again, we thank you all for joining. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. Again, if you all have time to fill this survey form out, which is, or is a feedback form, just to let us know how this webinar went today. So again, the floor is open now for you to share any tips or ask any questions that you have about winter biking.